Welcome to Duck Season Somewhere podcast. This episode is brought to you by the following sponsors. For 365 days a year, it's duck season somewhere at Ramsey Russell's GetDucks.com. The world of duck hunting is way bigger than our backyard. The very best duck hunts in Argentina and Mexico are only the beginning. We specialize exclusively in 6 continents worth of proven waterfowl hunting adventures. Whether you're looking for a unicorn species or a fun trigger pulling vacation of epic proportion, we've got the right hunt dialed in. Real duck hunts and authentic experiences for serious duck hunters. As a genuine American duck hunter myself, I know the difference. Founded in 2003, GetDucks.com is not just what we do, it's all we do. I've been there personally many times. Our reputation speaks for itself. Anita and I are personally available to assist before, during, and after your trip because you deserve nothing less. Looking for something closer to home? The next great hunt is closer than you think. Contact proven operators throughout the U.S. and Canada at our U.S. hunt list. Explore worldwide duck hunting at GetDucks.com. All package details, photos, videos, stories, and thousands of client testimonials right there at your fingertips. GetDucks.com. Ball Shot Shell's copper-plated bismuth tin alloy is the good old days again. Steel shots come a long way in the past 30 years, but will never, ever be like good old-fashioned lead. No way. Say goodbye to all the gimmicky, high recoil compensation science and marketing hype, and hello to superior performance. Know your pattern, take ethical shots, make clean kills. That is the boss way. The good old days are now. It really is duck season somewhere for 365 days per year. Duck season somewhere takes me year-round to worldwide destinations where I visit with the most interesting people. I'm your host, Ramsey Russell. Join me here to listen to those conversations. This is Ramsey Russell, GetDucks.com. It's duck season somewhere. Today is November 25th, and I am in southern Arkansas at Commander's Corner. It's the first Monday of duck season. We've had a pretty decent season, no complaints there. But I've got a special guest today. I have got Luke Naylor with the Arkansas Game and Fish, and we're here to talk about some of the WMA management, some of the great management going on in the state of Arkansas that may or may not be popular with some of the listening public, but we're here to just kind of clean up the air and talk about it and let us know what you think. Luke, how are you?
Doing all right. Yeah, a little warm for this time of year, but doing okay.
Well, so that people that don't know you personally can kind of know who you are and where you're coming from. Tell me this: you're a duck hunter?
I am.
Where were you born and raised?
I was born in South Central Wichita, Kansas. So
Wichita, Kansas.
Grew up in South Central Kansas, a little town just north of Wichita, actually. But grew up in South Central Kansas and went to college at Kansas State University, and then did some graduate work out in the University of California at Davis.
Oh, okay.
So spent a few years out there in a different part of duck country that people don't talk about quite as much around these parts, but. Pretty ducky out there as well.
But you got some good waterfowl management, it sounds like, and now the Mississippi, Central, and Pacific flyways.
That's right.
That's great. That's great. How did you get into duck hunting?
My dad had a whole family of hunters, lots of family dove hunts, quail hunts, pheasant hunts, rabbit hunts, then kind of somehow just took to waterfowl hunting. I don't know exactly when that happened. I mean, I knew I wanted to do this career, kind of strange, pretty young, like I've got a third grade boy right now, and in third grade, I knew I wanted to do this as a career, and I don't know I have any idea what he wants to do right now, but so I hunting in general was just part of our family. It's just what we did. Yeah. And then sometime around that 10, 11, 12-year-old age, I think I really took to duck hunting. It was during drought times, low duck populations.
Same here.
Could shoot 2 greenheads there on the Central Flyway or 1 hen mallard and be done for the day, but I got hooked nonetheless.
That's crazy because that's really when I got hooked myself on duck hunting, was in a two mallard per day limit era, which my kids haven't seen. I got a 22-year-old son that hasn't seen that, but that's the year I got hooked. And oddly enough, I was hunting with some friends on Arkansas Public.
Yeah.
And it hooked me right through the roof of the mouth like a big old bass. What do you think it is that hooked you on the duck hunting at that age? I mean, because you had it, man. I mean, Kansas is just eat up with hunting opportunities.
Yeah, lots of it. A lot of it wasn't as well publicized back then as what it is now, for sure. But you know, I don't know. I didn't turkey hunt initially. My dad didn't turkey hunt. Nobody in my family turkey hunted. I was the first one who ever took to turkey hunting by just begging my dad to take me, and of course he did. But yeah, I think he had a friend who had grown up doing some duck hunting, took him, and so you know, once. Love the dog work, the quail hunting, pheasant hunting. That's fantastic. I mean, dove hunting, of course, just a great family experience. Maybe it was the calling, just the decoys, everything involved in trying to decoy waterfowl. I think all the different species of birds, you know, I was drawn to that at an early age. You know, bird identification, waterfowl identification is just something I kind of enjoyed at a young age. So maybe it was that about duck hunting that I got. It's
the whole aura. It's hard for me to articulate it too. I mean,
it's all parts of it.
No one thing.
Yep, it's all
it's like the relationship with this bird, the calling and the dogs and the ducks and the camaraderie and the shooting and the decoying. It's just the whole thing.
Yeah, and it was kind of a sort of a downtime, if you will, when I was growing up in Kansas. So in mid-October, you could start doing some duck hunting, and it was the second Saturday in November when quail and pheasant season came in. Our family didn't do a whole lot of bow hunting for deer. We rifle hunted when that short season came in after Thanksgiving in Kansas. But you know, it was kind of a time when you could get out and hunt when a lot of other stuff wasn't happening. Again, unless you're a bow hunter.
Right.
So now that's of course different here. And it was different when I was out in California, but it was kind of it just was something else we could do for 2 or 3 weekends there in October, before quail and pheasant season started. And you had some, you know, pretty mild weather at that time. Lots of birds moving in to the state. Then, of course, got hooked on a lot of phenomenal later season duck hunts as well.
And how long have you worked for Arkansas Game and Fish?
About a little over 13 years. I moved here in right around the 1st of June in 2006.
Was it a big cultural shock coming from California to here?
It was. It felt a little bit more like going home, though. I mean, growing up in Kansas, it was, you know, it's a whole lot more of that middle of the country feel. California's a different place.
It's a whole different vibe. But for people who've never been to California, it's amazing how rural it can be in part. Out in the ag country where the ducks are hanging out, it's a very rural area.
And I joke with people, you go deer hunting in California in the hills, and you'll see just as many rednecks as you see driving around in the Delta. And I say that as, you know, not a negative term. Yeah. It's just they're good people, and you don't think about that. Nobody thinks about California as having that. Went up to Northeast California for a duck hunt on some of those real famous refuges they have up there, and public wildlife areas. And man, you're driving around with old pickup trucks and gun racks in the windows, you know, stuff I grew up seeing in Kansas that you didn't see much if you went by the Bay Area, for example. You know, you don't see a whole lot of that.
No, I bet.
But the duck hunting in California is just phenomenal.
Some of the best mallard hunting in the country.
It's phenomenal. Many times I remember, you know, 7 greenheads, which is just crazy to think about back in the central Mississippi.
Without having to look for a game warden, but
it's a totally different deal. and you know, being able to have, and it's not about the numbers of birds, it's just the quality. Just the quality of it.
Right.
And you could go out and have hunts where you shot 7 greenheads, or you could have a hunt where you shot 7 birds and literally could have 7 different species, and just a lot of variety out there. You know, lots of green winged teal. I mean, one of the counties out there, I think, is still the top green winged teal harvest county in the nation. No offense to Louisiana, of course.
Yeah, well, I've heard that California produces more rice, second only to Arkansas.
Yep,
that's the numbers I've heard.
And theirs has gone up and down too. With water. Big deal there is water. Right here in the Arkansas Delta with groundwater concerns, but they've got it out there with just overall availability. They have a drought, you know, for a period of time there. It's a whole lot more financially appealing to a landowner to just sell the water downstream to LA than it is to grow rice. So fortunately, there's still a pretty good rice base there, and that's helped, like it has here in the Delta, really kept things going for lots of years.
Well, from Kansas to California to Arkansas. What is your title with Arkansas Game and Fish?
Waterfowl Program Coordinator.
So you're the guy.
Yeah, most people talk about the waterfowl biologist, duck biologist. It's been called a bunch of different things over the years, but we kind of have this program coordinator title. So yeah, waterfowl program coordinator.
And what all resource concerns fall under your purview?
If it's got to do with ducks or geese in the state, typically I'm involved somehow. That varies. That's all sorts of degrees, right? Regulations each year and stuff. That's mainly kind of I'm almost flying solo with a team of advisors.
And duck hunting in Arkansas is not a small program.
No, it's big.
It's a big program.
It's a big deal. So, habitat work, we've got a wetland biologist and wetlands technician who really lead most of that. Then we got a whole pile of wildlife management division staff who help really do the work out there on all the wildlife management areas. Yeah.
Tell me, I want to talk about the Green Tree Reservoir Management on state wildlife management areas. How or when did that evolve into when it become a big deal? It's like they weren't doing any management at all maybe 20 years ago, and now all of a sudden it really needs some work done. But how did this evolve? How did that process topic evolve?
Yeah, we've had a couple probably big points where that's ramped up. The most recent one of them, is about 3 years ago now, and but it still feels kind of new. But we had a little push, I would say, in the late 90s where folks first started to present to the commission, said, hey, there's some issues going on out there.
Now, were these private citizens?
No, these were our folks.
Biologists, foresters, agencies.
Okay. That's right. Looked at it and said, man, we're seeing some changes in the forest out here in these GTRs especially, bottom and hardwoods in general, but primarily in the green tree reservoirs. The managed bottom and hard impounded water control structures, those sorts of things, bottom and hardwood. So didn't get a lot of traction at that point. Then tried again in about 2007, kind of brought these concerns forward and got a better start at it. I think that 2007 effort kind of set us up for what we're doing now because it got the conversation front and center. We didn't move it quite as far as operationally is what we've done this time, but at least got it on the right in front of everybody. In the meantime, it's kind of waiting for the research to get there too, because we had lots of more than anecdotes, I guess.
Right. Go out there and do some inventory.
We got some smart folks out there, right? Yeah. There's a lot of foresters out there, a lot of our biologists. They're sharp enough, and we know what we're seeing. But you know how the real world works. I mean, you kind of need to have some solid evidence behind what you're recommending. And during that whole time, there's a long-term study going on just right in our backyard at Felsenthal National Wildlife Refuge. Mm-hmm. They've been looking at their green tree reservoir management and doing a long-term study of the changes in forest community and forest health because they think of green tree reservoir management.
Well, if you look at natural areas, natural forested wetlands, and I know there's some WMAs that have a lot of that where the river jumps out of a bank, it comes, it goes. You've got wet years, you've got dry years. That's right. The flood duration varies, and all of a sudden you put a levee around it. Now you've got man-induced flooding, plus or minus what the beavers or structure failures or anything else wants the water off, plus the river jumping out and everything else. So it becomes it's like a whole nother layer. But nonetheless, what I'm trying to say is it's artificial management.
It is. We
try to mimic the natural cycle, but it's artificial management. And now we've got the biological side, the management relative to the trees and the resource, but now also we've got public use coming in. They're voters, so we've got politicians becoming involved. And now it's not, if I'm and I'm jumping here, guys, I'm leading them along, but it's not just biology. No. Now we've got this whole personal element pulled into it. But just so these guys listening may or may not know what we're talking about, I'm a forester. I know you're a wildlife biologist. What changes were the resource personnel beginning to see out in those GTRs that concern them?
Yeah, so it's stuff that happens where most of the time duck hunters going out 60 days of the season in the winter typically don't notice. It's gradual changes, sometimes more rapid, but gradual changes in forest composition and in tree health. So you start to see areas that had a lot of red oaks in them. Willow oaks and nuttall oaks are our primary red oaks we got in these GTRs. So
and that's what those mallards are eating.
Mallards like, and you got water oak, cherry bark, and some high ridges and things, but less common. So you got those two species. They're the big duck food producing trees, and they're also just, I guess, unfortunately in this case, happen to be the ones that can take less water. Mm-hmm. So overcup oak, which produces an acorn that we hear a lot about from the public when they go out there and look at a particular area. It's flooded and they see acorns floating all over the place, and you hear plenty of comments about how, man, it must be great for ducks this year. Look at all these acorns out here, and all of those floating acorns aren't worth a flip for ducks. They're either an overcup that 80 to 90% of them they can't even fit in their mouth, or they're a non-viable red oak acorn, right?
If it's a red oak and it's floating, it's not viable. You got a problem,
right? So you got to dig your hand under the water, dig in that leaf litter to find any kind of duck food. Yeah. And so all of that was shifting. These red oaks are dying, being replaced by overcup oaks. But that happens really gradually. I mean, people start to see windthrow trees, an entire willow oak tree falling over, root wad attached, what's left of the root wad attached. But it's easy to think, well, man, how could you not notice that? But you go by
because trees don't grow like tomato plants.
No, and trees fall over. Yeah, they do. I mean, that just happens naturally. So
it's what they call gap phase regeneration. And when you look at it, we throw out things like overcup acorns, which historically grow down the lowest place on the floodplain. Then you've got a cherry bark at the opposite spectrum that grows on the highest part of the floodplain. In between, you've got your willow oaks, your water oaks, and your nuttall. And by artificially putting water onto these areas and holding it for a longer period of times, more consecutive years in a row, the plant community begins to respond. So even though it may topographically be in higher elevation, it's behaving or performing like a lower elevation. So you start getting those lower quality species growing in there.
Yeah, we talk about it as you're essentially moving the overcups up the hill.
Yeah, that's it.
And you're pushing the red oaks up way up. Removing them.
Or out of their boundaries.
You're kind of removing them. So, and
to complicate things, because, heck, this is tornado country just like Kansas. I mean, so without timber thinnings and without changing the light conditions, because any oak tree grows at 50% sunlight. It's not a late succession species, it's a mid-succession species. And by letting it just stay stagnant, well, a forest does what it does. It starts reverting to very shade-tolerant species. Along comes a tornado and disturbs those conditions that have been too shaded for 5 decades. And all that's going to regenerate in that gap is going to be shade-tolerant species like hop hornbeams or elms or ashes. I may have thrown ashes in there too soon, but what's not going to come in there is good red oak generation that your grandkids or your great-grandkids going to see. Am I right?
You're right. And human nature is to want things consistent. And, folks who developed GTRs back by accident in the 30s and 40s, and then on purpose in the 50s and 60s for ducks, it was well-meaning, right? Most of the MAV's forests have been lost, and they saw a need to provide habitat for ducks in these forested wetlands. I mean, it wasn't because people wanted to leave us with something to do 60 years down the road. They wanted to do the right thing for ducks and for duck hunters. And now the problem is, though, you end up 60, 70 years down the road and have essentially done the same thing, focusing on providing annual waterfowl hunting opportunity.
That's right.
And you do that for 60 years, and all of a sudden you look back and say, well, wait a minute. Yeah. The whole thing's changed because you haven't had a real long-term objective to say, hey, your long-term goal here is to provide this habitat for the next 100 years. It's not to make sure it's flooded by duck season opening day. It's to make sure this habitat is sustainable. First and foremost, you've just got to sustain this habitat. Then, of course, we're not going to forget about duck hunters, and we haven't. These areas have been critically important areas for waterfowl hunting for decades. We hope to keep them that way, and we plan to keep them that way. But but it's kind of this circular conversation. I mean, you really have to have those habitats, or you're not going to have the waterfowl hunting opportunity. And again, you start to see these gradual changes, and you know, hear people talk about, well, there's not as many ducks out here as there used to be, not as many ducks using these woods. And well, you know, there's lots of reasons that could be, but ducks sure like good habitat.
They like good habitat.
And the food's not there, and you've got a bunch of, you know, 8 to 12 inch overcup oak regeneration in all these places that doesn't let any herbaceous cover up come in on the forest floor. It doesn't produce an acorn that a duck really values. It's a nice little thicket for them when they need a loaf in January, and that's not a problem.
Good healthy canopies, generate more leaf litter, generate more invertebrate biomass. I mean, it's a never-ending cycle.
And those openings where you're talking about tornadoes, now we have to, mostly with the limited acreage we have, we're doing that with forest management. We will need to do more of it, active forest management, to put that sunlight on the ground, which you know just produces a phenomenal herbaceous growth for a period of years until the trees can take over.
That's right.
Then, they shade out the herbaceous stuff. But you're talking, you know, 5 to 10 years of some pretty good groceries and bug producing plants.
Right.
Being in that opening.
That's a very good point.
And, you know, you go back a lot of, with the forest management side of things, it's interesting as we've gone through, we've been in the process of reviewing all of these areas. We have nearly 50 individual GTRs at over 50,000 acres of them. And we've been going around and individually conducting reviews at every WMA and looking at every GTR, and a lot of differences, but a whole lot of similarities. And that's kind of forced folks to go back and look at the history of acquisition and early management of these places. And man, almost every one of them we've been to talks about the condition of the land when we purchased it, when Game and Fish purchased it. And boy, we hear a lot of comments when a thinning operation is getting ready to start, when we start marking trees. Oh man, boy, here come the emails and the phone calls, right? And, you know, don't touch this, untouched timber, this virgin timber out here. There's no such thing.
No.
And we bought, when these folks have gone back and looked at the history, and we bought a bunch of this stuff, and the deeds had timber harvests attached to them. You know, we bought the land, and they're still coming in and cutting
that timber, right?
And we're talking diameter cuts. You know, we've got one Henry Gary Hurricane Lake, and I'm pretty sure, if I'm remembering correctly, that, you know, they had like 12 or 14 inch diameter cuts. I mean, so every tree would be
every tree they
within
wanted.
Reason. Every tree they wanted, they would take. And so you think why we have red oaks now, it's partly because those are the trees that are supposed to be there.
Right.
But 70, 80 years ago, there was a whole lot of sunlight put on the ground.
That's right.
That created those conditions for the forest we have out there now, that is now being affected by the water management and the lack of forest management that's happened since we purchased it. So a major forest management effort, whether we wanted it or not, when we first bought these things. And then not a lot of forest management in these duck hunting areas for many, many years now, with the addition of water stress. And so what you got is a completely different forest community out there right now, for all those different reasons, kind of piling in on one. So circle back.
It's a lot of facets to this. To this problem right here. You know, on the one hand, what's good for the resource, without which hunters don't matter.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Okay, so after the problems, the observations started coming in from the resource personnel that were out in the field, y'all started talking amongst the agency, amongst the other people. And where'd you go from there? Okay, we've got this problem. You finally got it in front of the right audience, politically, I'm assuming, the politicians. Now what? Now what happens? You write a management plan? And
so we took a lot of time, and around 2014, in the summer of 2014, we contracted to have forest health assessments completed on all of our GTRs. And this is a kind of a one-shot in time deal where we just went out and tried to assess forest health, really focusing on those nut-all oak. We looked at all species, but really have honed in our analysis and reporting on those primary species: willow, nut-all, overcup.
Right.
Because there's differences there, as we've talked about. So we did that in 2014. The results came back kind of like what we expected. This is all contracted out to private forestry companies.
Sure.
They did the work, sent us the data. We started looking at it, and the results were sort of what the literature and our observations would have predicted. Red oaks in bad shape, overcup oak in good shape, and starting to become dominant in the forest. So it was a real short answer, or a real short summary there. So at that point, we knew we had, take a step back, that and the existing body of scientific literature out there that's accumulated over the past 20 or 30 years. I spent a whole lot of time thinking I was back in school, which I never wanted to be, going back, reviewing all this literature and compiling it in a single document that looks at all not all, but all I can find, all I could dig up, existing literature about green tree reservoir and bottom and hardwood management. Right. They all point the same direction.
That's right.
Doing it for years and years and years just changes the forest community, and it's really not sustainable. And so we ended up taking that then to our commission, continuing to provide information to our directorate and our commission, and just kind of bring them up to speed on what the issue was, what we were finding, and what we proposed we needed to do moving forward. And that culminated with changing our water management practices, our infrastructure management, starting with the 2017-2018 duck season. Now, I think one key important point of that is, and biologists are pretty bad about this. We like to dig around in data and stuff, but sometimes aren't all that great about communicating stuff. We could have gotten ourselves just put ourselves in a box and said, we know what's right and we're just going to do it. And that's that. But because we communicated with our directorate and our commission, got them on board, we then did a major public information campaign. Right. So in late February, March of 2017, we published a document. We got a fantastic communications division in our agency, and they helped us take all that 50 pages of literature review I'd done and make it digestible. Because people can understand all that. It's fine, but they don't want to read 50 pages of it. Right. So we brought the key points into a real shiny, glossy publication that we then direct mailed to every household in which a person had purchased a duck stamp at least once out of the previous 3 seasons. So about a little over 100,000 households. Wow. We direct mailed it. And so at that point, it really wasn't a whole lot of people who shouldn't have heard about it. Yeah. And then we had a series of public meetings, and then we went to our commission and said, here's what we need to do. We're gonna start a process of evaluating these. There's going to be major infrastructure renovations, forest management needs, all sorts of stuff over what's going to end up being a 10, 20, 30 year timeline here. But in the meantime, with our existing infrastructure, we need to set everything back. We know that we are closing structures well before red oak dormancy, and we have to push that back. There's just no more time to wait. We've got to do that now.
Save what you got.
Save what we can. And that's the thing we can control. We've heard a lot of feedback now about, look at all the spring and summer water, and that's absolutely correct. Spring and summer water are huge, but what are we going to do right now about that? And what we could do immediately is just change when we close the structures, change when we drop the boards. So by and large, we moved them back about a month. So we'd have most of our GTRs were an October 15th board update. Now the majority of them are November 15th. Mm-hmm. A couple of them in far south Arkansas are December 1st. We had board updates as early as October 1st. Wow. In some of these places. And if you, again, through these reviews, you go back and hear about what happened historically. Well, when rice used to come off in September and October, that was a whole lot of water available.
That's right, yeah.
And this is not limited.
It had to go somewhere.
And man, that's free water. Let's just take that and flood our woods, And a lot of private landowners in the same situation we are. We're not alone on this deal. Right. There's a lot of private GTR managers who are facing the same issues. Because, man, that free water was sure appealing in September and October. So you go back and talk to folks with some history. They say, oh, yeah, man, that GTR, we'd take all of that rice water in September. We'd be we'd be lipping full the first week of October. And there's a whole lot of green red oak leaves in October.
Right.
And honestly, they're about the better part of November and maybe even early December in a lot of years, especially for willow oaks.
Yeah.
So we controlled what we can control right off the top, which was that board update. And this is the third year that we've implemented that. Now, in the meantime, we're looking at, okay, how do we do better in the long run? How do we get that spring and summer water moving through the system? My kind of new mantra in this whole thing is we got to move forward thinking about how we move water, not how we hold water.
Right.
Because you can look back at the way the infrastructure is on these places. And again, I mean, well-meaning people, managers who were doing what they thought was the right thing at the time. And you go to an area and you get, 60, 70 water control structures on an area. And I'm including, earthen plugs as water control structures. Man, that's a lot. And you can picture what these guys were doing. Anytime water would be moving through this system, and then it's duck season, and somebody calls them, comes up to the office and says, man, there's water coming out right here. Okay, all right, I'll get on that. And so you know what happens? They go in and put an earthen plug in. Next summer, they go put a structure right there, right? Because they're trying to do everything they can to not let water move through that area during duck season.
Yep.
To let it all park there. Well, now that, it seems like spring and summer flooding is a whole lot bigger deal than what it was.
Seems to be getting worse.
Seems to be. Now, all those places, that's the same place the water is just backing up and stagnating all during those spring and summer months, nowhere to move. And again, people thought they were doing right. Managers on the ground did not have commission level support to say, no, we're not going to do that. We want water to be moving through these systems. And if it's flowing out a slough here, that's a good thing. Those people back 30, 40 years ago didn't have the support at the highest level to do that. And we do now.
Science has come a long way since back in the 50s. We know a lot more than we did then. We know what's good for the hardwoods and the natural cycles and mimic them and stuff like that. I mean, it's a complicated time, isn't it?
It is, but the information is power in this case, right? We know a lot more than we used to.
Well, what is the number one complaint you seem to hear in response to good, sound forest management in green tree reservoirs?
Yeah, don't cut my tree. As far as the forest management side of things, we hear a lot of feedback that, man, you're clear cutting this spot. Well, and we haven't clear cut anything, and I mean they do it in industrial pine country, but on WMA lands we
shelter wood cut.
We haven't clear cut anything, and I don't know how long. But we are moving towards these desired forest conditions type thing, where it's an uneven aged management. Where you're going to have you may find an opening and market to kind of grow that opening. Build off an existing semi-natural opening and build out from that, make that your regeneration area. And that opening you may grow that to a couple acre size, for example, but then there'll be a thicket, right? For a little while. And then you'll see another patch like that, another opening. So
very, very patchy stem density across the forest.
The guys now, as we've gone out there and spent a lot of time with our foresters out there, they kind of say from one opening, you ought to look through some denser stuff, a little thicker understory, and you ought to be able to kind of see that next opening through that. Right. But by clear cut, of course, you'd be able to see clean through it, right? So so people see any tree cut at all, and it's quickly just characterized. Well, you're clear cutting. Forest management's ugly. We did a cut on my personal property over in Warren County, Mississippi, and you walk out through that timber and see all the pink paint, and I mean, like, holy cow, there's going to be nothing left. And then for 4 or 5 years after the cut, it's ugly. There's nothing attractive about it. Nope. Nothing aesthetic about it. And but at the same time, you walk through 7, 8 years later, you start to see all these red oaks coming up. You start seeing it
the wood settle down, the paint go away, and the forest begin to behave and do what it's supposed to be doing at a forest. And you say, oh, well, wait a minute, this is pretty dang nice.
It worked out, and all of a sudden, I think a few people, we don't hear from these folks quite as much, but you see a few of these places, and you do a timber cut like that, then all of a sudden, a couple years later, people killing a lot of ducks in those places. That's right. A lot of deer bedding in those thickets. Lots of things happening when you put that diversity back into it. I've looked at a bunch of these places, and I'm not a forester by training, but have a lot of folks, of course, on our staff and partners we're working with in our reviews who have a lot of experience in that. Man, I as a public land duck hunter, in access.
And you are a public land duck hunter.
Yeah. Oh yeah. That's what I do. I may hunt private land a couple times a year. A lot of goose hunting on private land, of course, because that's where they are. But we don't have any of those on public land. Right. But generally, but yeah, public land duck hunter and access is an issue, right? People see it's messy out there after a timber harvest. And boy, I walk in some of these GTRs now though, and I look at them and say, well, I can't look 100 yards in any direction without seeing a 20 to 40 inch red oak on the ground. And all the large dead limbs on the ground. See, I mean, that's not hard to get through. Yeah. I mean, that's some navigation issues there too. And that's all because we haven't been doing proper management that stuff is falling like that, right? It's messy. I mean, it's just not a clean system, right. And it's never going to be, if we're managing it right, we're going to have timber harvest out there that's going to create what looks like a messy situation for, as you described, for a few years. But, by and large, you get past 5, 7, 8 years, you kind of almost forget that it happened because the forest starts to take on that different look to it. But man, it's ugly. People don't like to see the equipment, see a tree that they like to lean against with paint on it. Mm-hmm. It's just a natural, inclination, not just to be kind of angry about that, right? Yeah. I mean, they're going to cut the tree that I lean up against. But what we have
feels personal, doesn't it?
It does feel personal. Yeah. And our job though is to take the personal out of it. Our job is to look at the long term, look at the entire system, and try to make we're not perfect, but try to make the best decision we can for the long run. And that's hard for folks. I understand that as a public land duck hunter. We were talking here before it came on about this opening weekend, and part of it's because I've been visiting family most holiday weekends since I lived here, and that's back in Kansas by and large. But, this first part of duck season as a public land duck hunter, the 13 years I've been here, I generally don't get all that excited about it, because, habitat conditions are highly unpredictable. It's variable. Now with our GTR management stuff, we know we're generally not going to have a whole lot of water in those places by design. So it's kind of a sit back and wait, and I'll get wound up about it when this second segment comes in mid-December. Like, okay, that last 50 days is when public land duck hunters really make some hay. That's right. That's not to say there haven't been some good duck hunts this opening weekend, because I know I've heard there have been. Yeah, I have too. but you just kind of have to get that long-term vision. And it's been, I guess it's been a little bit surprising, but in a really good way. With this third year, it's almost like this is just the way we do it now. That's with good. This later board update.
So a lot of the uproar and fury just kind of calmed down a little bit.
Yep. And we still got tons of room to keep the information flow going, keep communicating with people. We're never going to stop doing that. When we say, hey, here's how we're going to redesign this particular GTR, like getting very local scale on this. We're going to go out and meet with the local hunters and say, hey, here's what we have in mind for this area. Now it's been big picture, overall, long-term concepts. It's kind of a big scale stuff, but we're going to be getting down more in the weeds, if you will.
And how will, because I think it's so admirable that a state agency that has sovereign over this resource is nonetheless inviting public stakeholder input. to help them craft the policy and get everything on the, that's very transparent. It's very, wow, what a great concept that is to get the public involved. But how would the local stakeholders, local hunters become involved? How would they know that this is coming? Where would you post that information? How would they know to get involved with this?
Yeah, lots of different sources now, right? I mean, everybody, lots of electronic ways of communicating with people. But again, we got a great communication staff. We'll get, one of the first areas we may work on is Body View, for example. It's up by Wiener, kind of getting close to Northeast Arkansas, not way up there, but, we've got a couple grants in the pipe right now in cooperation with Ducks Unlimited to try to start doing some infrastructure work on that place. So, we'd hit local newspapers, we'd put stuff out. We don't have a lot of big information kiosks on WMAs anymore because they typically end up as targets, but and typically not from hunters, I don't think. Right. It's all the other 10 months out of the year use. But we'd get email stuff. We've got a big list of people who take our weekly waterfowl habitat report. And so you send it out to all those people. You send it out on our general weekly newsletter stuff. You do social media pushes to get people word of mouth type stuff out there. And like at that place, when we get some plans conceptualized here and get some we got concepts, and we're working now on kind of engineering designs where people could actually wrap their head around, okay, here's what it's going to look like. Here's what we're proposing it would look like. That's when you call a meeting with the public and say, hey, here's what we've got in mind. Here's what we're thinking, and here's why we're doing this. Move water through here, that type of stuff, right? Change this levee here. And let people ask a lot of questions at that point about the whys and wherefores of what we're doing. Right. Hopefully to just get people to understand, dispel, myths that may be out there about why we're doing it. Get the information, hear it from the horse's mouth. Sure. If you will, look us in the eye and say, hey, we're going to tell you right now what we've got planned, and let's have some conversation right now. Because even with the messaging we've done so far, it's amazing. I had multiple people this year say, well, this is going to be the dry year at Biomeda, right? This is going to be the dry year where you just leave all the structures open. I said, no, we haven't proposed a quote unquote dry year for any GTR yet, an unmanaged year. Now we talked about how long term with new infrastructure, we would have much more adaptable management plans that aren't just November 15th and that's it. Because that's what we did for 60 years. Just pick one date and go with it. We're not going to, we'd be kind of foolish to do do that again.
Try to imitate that natural cycle.
We're going to, but it's interesting to hear. I talked to one individual who said, this is a year, right? I said, no. So where'd you hear that? He said, down here at the coffee shop, man. I've heard 3 or 4 people tell me that today. And
probably just trying to keep out-of-staters away.
Maybe. And I said, look, here's the deal. I said, if that's happening, I sure hope that you don't hear it first from the coffee shop. Right. I said, we're going to be screaming that from the rafters. If we're going to leave the boards open at Biomeda, you won't hear about it from the coffee shop first. Right. I sure hope. We'll be telling a lot of people about it. So it's just that information exchange, man, and not being scared of it, and not being, we've taken a lot of very tough questions, had a lot of really good feedback from the public. Really, these folks aren't uninformed at all. Right. There's a lot of very informed questions. We've talked about the spring and summer flooding, man, and as soon as we start talking about changing things in the fall, which feels like a direct impact on the public land hunter, immediately it's, well, what are you doing about the spring and summer? Which what is can good. You do? Right, but it's lots of very real well-founded questions, like hard questions of, hey, what are you gonna? This is the biggest stressor, and all we can tell them is, we agree that is a huge stressor, but there's a lot of other factors involved in fixing that. And generally, we aren't the primary responsible authority on some of those big issues like that. Some of them we have more influence than others. So just keeping the public informed. We're working towards, we think, at the end of this duck season, so it'd be in 2020, So 3 years after that one primary informational document we mailed out, we're planning to repeat that. And not the same one and just mail out again, but take that same concept of, 4, 5, 6 page, shiny, easy to read document that we kind of tell people where we were and kind of where we've been in the last 3 years since we sent it out. Mail that out again to every duck stamp holder.
Updates, let them know.
Update them.
I didn't ask you this question, Luke. How many acres of GTR are in WMAs? It's approximately in Arkansas.
A little over 50,000.
50,000.
So, it really depends on how you draw that line, right?
Right.
And it's funny because people talk about 50 or 51 or 52, and it's,
right.
I don't get too wound up in that because if you look at elevation information that we have now and our structure elevations.
And we're not talking about naturally flood. We're talking about under a levee. Or
these are
behind a levee.
These are what we think, like the mean sea level of our infrastructure, the maximum it can hold water is this, and that's a little over 50,000. But we do know that you take a place like Biomeda, we might draw, you might draw a line, a polygon, if you will, for a GTR at a certain MSL. But and that's where our infrastructure maxes out. That's it. That's all we can hold. But we know when a 4-inch rain hits Jacksonville, that water's coming down that watershed.
Temporarily, it's going to be more.
It's a lot bigger, and our infrastructure isn't that high. But we know because we've got all this water stacked up in there already that we are influencing a larger area, which can be a good thing because we provide some duck habitat and some duck hunting opportunity above our management pool, if you will. So we're really influencing more than that 50,000. But that number, again, it kind of it probably moves around a lot depending on the year. And that's something we keep kind of bringing back to the public and our directorate and commission is, in the grand scheme of things, 50,000 acres. In a 20-some million acre delta.
Yeah.
It's
that 50,000 acres represents a huge percent of high quality public hunting opportunity for waterfowl in flooded timber Arkansas. I mean, it's a lot of the delta is cleared.
And that's why and you said right there, high quality waterfowl hunting opportunity on public land. And that's our long-term objective, right? And if we can't keep that true 50 years from now, we kind of see as managers and a managing agency right now. I mean, we've got the trust responsibility to take care of that stuff.
Yeah.
And if we don't, we're kind of, shame on us.
How just real quick, how far along are you into the management of the total 50,000 acres, and how long do you think it'll take to run the whole first cycle of touch-up in terms of timber management?
Yeah, so here's what we're doing. We're working on infrastructure first, generally speaking, before we're trying to work with our foresters, work with our forest management folks on, okay, can we prescribe forest management activities on this place? Do we think we've got the water right enough? Maybe not perfect, but we think we have the water that we can be successful in a forest management activity, right? If we know we can't get the water off of a place, probably no sense in going in and doing a cut when we know what red oaks do regenerate aren't going to have a great chance of making it unless we just happen to hit 3 or 4 dry years in a row.
Right.
Now, one example, Sheffield, Nelson, Dagmar Wildlife Management Area. It's just kind of by Brinkley, right in the central delta. We did kind of before all this happened or simultaneously. There was a timber harvest prescribed there, marked. It was done, and it's within one of the GTRs. And amazing red oak regeneration, phenomenal. So the forest management team came back to us and our wildlife management administration and said, hey, we really need to leave this GTR open. We think we've got a great red oak stand here, young trees. I forget the numbers, but it was 600 or 800 stamens per acre of regen.
Wow.
And so that's success, right? So we went to the public last year and went to our, again, to our administration and said, hey, we need to make this decision with infrastructure management because of what's happening with this regeneration. Supported us, said, okay, we'll leave it open. So yeah, it flooded. They provided duck hunting opportunity and duck habitat, but we never artificially kept the water stacked up in the system. And this year, I think they went in and it was 1,000 stems per acre.
Wow.
And so we're going to leave it open again. On the other hand, we had a major timber die-off in the South GTR of Henry Gray Hurricane Lake. And our forest management folks they quickly responded to that and said, hey, we've got some plans. Here's what we need to do. This is immediate urgency because this is, I'm talking not all oaks, 30, 40 inch trees greened up last summer of 2018, and then we're a crown of brown leaves by early September.
That's never good.
Not good at all. We're talking a brownout, as they call it, right? That it was done. Really bad, and about doubled this summer.
Wow.
And so they have plans, of course, to say, hey, okay, here's what we need to do with regeneration, with planting. But we kind of all talked and said, well, we don't have the water fixed yet. We don't have any way to get that water out of the South GTR. So immediately we went to work planning infrastructure renovations.
I see.
And we actually went to administration again and said, we will not close any water control structures on the South GTR. And that's essentially the South GTR isn't a GTR anymore. We're not going to close any structures, but we have some major plans in development to essentially reconnect that whole GTR, that whole land area there. There's about 4 or 5 places where there's no flow through. Old sloughs just been cut off by roads and various structures over the years, and we're gonna fix all that the best we can so water moves in and out of there as freely as it can. Not manage that as a GTR anymore. When that's done, boom, we'll move in with the forest management practices.
Yeah.
Knowing that we'll see that soil profile dry up.
Get it manageable before you manage it.
Yeah, but it's a balancing act. I'm sure you well know, right? You let that sit there for a little bit. You got a lot of sunlight on the ground right now.
That's right.
So what's going to be in there? Chances are your forest restoration practices get a little more complicated, a little more costly because you got something in there you got to get rid of now before you go in and try to reset it. So, but we think long term, that'll be most successful. I mean,
have you got any parting shots? Have you got any last thoughts or comments you'd like to tell the listeners?
Yeah, just bear with us and stick with us. That's all you can say, I think. I think this is a long-term, I know this is a long-term effort. A lot of us right now in different, I'd say that 10 to 20 year phase of our career are kind of like, man, if we pull this off by the time we're all retired, we'll call that a success. So this is not something that is going to change overnight. We're not going to see these positive changes overnight. This is setting it up so my 8-year-old will come out there 50 years from now and be able to hunt in these places.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's the way I look at it, it's not us, the duck hunters, versus y'all, a state or federal or anybody agency. We're all in the same lifeboat together. I mean, everybody's trying to do the best they can to produce an abundance of waterfowl. I've always marveled at the difference in a bird watcher versus a duck hunter. A bird watcher is just happy to see 1 or 2 birds, and we want to see a sky full.
That's right.
And that takes quality habitat.
Sure does. Right.
It sure does. Luke, I very much thank you for being here, folks. Thank y'all for listening. Again, I'm with Arkansas Game and Fish Commission, Arkansas Game and Fish State Waterfowl Coordinator Luke Naylor. Follow me at Ramsey Russell Get Ducks for On the Fly. If you've got any questions regarding this topic, don't hesitate to shoot me a text or shoot me an inbox or shoot me an email or contact Luke Naylor. As you heard throughout the podcast, Arkansas Game and Fish invites the hunter as a stakeholder into the conversation. Thank y'all. Duck Season Somewhere is produced by Ben Page. Original soundtrack by our friend Cody Huggins.